We've known each other a long time. I was one of those who was a little surprised when he made the decision to go to medical school. How did that discernment process work out for you?
Yeah, but I think most people were. For those of you who remember, in the college you had to do a couple scientific requirements. I was philosophy, theology, English. I cared nothing about science. I took physics of the energy and the environment and audio reproduction, which is how stereos worked, or back then. So science was not what I was trying to go into. In fact, I had to drop out of a class that Pat Ewing finished because I couldn't keep up with the science. What happened was I was working with Tim, and you when you were on the campus too, and I used to spend my summers here as well, and I read an article about AIDS in Africa. It was on the cover of Newsweek, and something about it just hit me, and it was one of those moments. And I fought against it, as we often do, fight against intentions. I believe in a higher being, and so I kept pushing in the direction I thought I wanted to go. And then when I worked for Tim, it just occurred to me that I needed to follow whatever that was. And so the advantage of working for the president of the university is, despite having audio reproduction and its physics of the energy and environment as your science classes, he was able to call the dean at the time, Milt Korn, and say, I think you should look at this guy. Which to a dean, when Tim's calling, usually means this is what you will do. And so Milt understood that message and wound up at the medical school there. But it really was that article. And when I talk to students now, that was such a pivotal experience for me. And the message of it still seems to be that if you follow what you love, or if you're fortunate enough to ever find that, which a lot of people aren't, it takes time. Just follow it. Just follow it. You'll never be unhappy. And there's so many pressures in the world today, especially on our students now, about pressures that we never had. That just find what you love and follow it, and things will happen. You'll be better at what you do because you care about them, and you will never have trouble sleeping, and it makes all the difference.
So after your residency, another point where a few of us were surprised, you went to work in a government lab. You went to work for Tony Fauci.
Yeah.
Why that choice? And if you could give a sense what Dr. Fauci represents in the context of American healthcare. So
Tony is unquestionably one of the leaders in America, also the product of Jesuit education up in New York, and then Holy Cross. He is an extraordinary man. He's the director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, has been for 20-some years. I think he was the youngest institute director ever. Brilliant man, but also just a very down-to-earth, caring human being. And very typically New York Italian. He's about as energetic as you'll ever find anyone. And he's just an extraordinary man. I don't know how many, I think he's got 37 honorary degrees. He's got over 1,000 publications. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and pretty much the only award he doesn't have is the Nobel Prize. He's that stature of scientist. But he's also just an incredible human being. And he attributes that to his Jesuit upbringing as well. When I was in my residency program, my director of medicine was very good friends with Tony, and he knew I was interested in AIDS, and Tony was the person in the world, really one of the leading people in the world for AIDS, and so he called him and said, kind of like, Tim, you should take a look at him. So that just began a relationship, and so I went to NIH to work with Tony. The reason I chose research was not my love of science. It was, at the time, some of you may remember, everyone with HIV was dying. I mean, it was horrific. And I did part of my medical training out in San Francisco, and there was a pall over the city. Everyone was dying. Social lives revolved around funerals. It's impossible to describe now what that was like. And so you couldn't do anything to treat anyone. There was no, being a clinician meant being a funeral director. So research seemed like a place to try to contribute in a way to overcome, in some small way, to deal with that total lack of knowledge. So that's how it wound up with research in NIH.
And then the early part of this past decade, you became part of a working group that designed what became the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. Some new treatments were available, and antiretroviral drugs were available. The question was, how could these be distributed? How might that address the pandemic that was unfolding in Africa and other parts of the world? Talk about that early planning period. What was it like being on the team that was responsible for designing PEPFAR?
It was extraordinary. I mean, it was a gift. Tony being Tony, when President Bush decided he wanted to do something on global AIDS, he turned to Tony, who his father actually knew too, and asked him what he should do. Well, Tony hadn't spent a lot of time in Africa. I was actually doing research in Africa at the time, and I was his point person for AIDS in his office. So he said, what are we going to do? A small team was created, and it was literally 5 or 6 of us, it was very closely held. And the reason wasn't because to keep it a secret. It's what I later learned, that had we gone through normal government processes, we would still be talking about what the plan should be. It is a very iterative, redundant process. And the president felt so deeply that we had to intervene, and intervene rapidly in emergency response, that we didn't have time for that. So the advantage was a very small group of people from the Office of Management and Budget, one from the Office of Management and Budget, one from the National Security Council, one from the Domestic Policy Council, the Deputy Chief of Staff at the time, Josh Bolton, who you know well, and basically Tony and I put together the plan, which then was announced in the State of the Union address of 2003, and it was a complete shock. No one knew about it. Cabinet secretaries were told that morning. The majority leaders in the houses were told that morning. The countries where we were going to work were told that morning. No one knew. Secrets aren't easy to keep in the city, and that's why we kept it as such a small group. But to be part of that was really extraordinary, and just a gift to have had that experience and be part of it. And the State of the Union address, it was an extraordinary event.